Warning, this video has spoilers. Even if you enjoy my videos, I highly recommend playing these games first. Watching this video can very much spoil one of the most, if not the most interesting stories in all of gaming. This video is designed for people who have played the games and are familiar with them. A few years ago, I picked up the relatively well-known 999, 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, and decided to give it a go. I loved it. It presented a complicated and intriguing story, and it left me awake several nights. I remember that I got every ending in a span of 12 hours without stopping. It was that addictive. One common complaint about the first game is that with every ending you have to start over, having to do all the puzzles again. Fortunately, you can skip dialogue, but this understandably doesn't ease the patience of a lot of fans. Although the succeeding games fix this by giving the player the ability to travel across space and time to all of the timelines they've already experienced, I feel like the pace of the story found itself compromised. The game still had alternative endings, but it didn't feel like it had any consequence. In 999, I got a 20-minute thriller where Junpei sees everyone around him die, and is eventually murdered himself, and I had to restart. Although it wasn't great having to play again, it left me a feeling of shock and excitement. As time travel and morphogenetic clairvoyance became more and more prominent, the game's feeling of consequence kinda diminished. The intimidation factor just gets smaller and smaller with each release, and that's where my issues with Zero Time Dilemma start. Now, first of all, Zero Time Dilemma was a joy to play through. In fact, I played it from start to finish in a weekend. But when I finished it, I just felt unsatisfied. Now, why would that be? Well, I think a good place to start is its mechanics. I think what escape games are good at is providing a complex story with good immersion and puzzles. And, well, Zero Time Dilemma is different. One of the most notable things about Zero Time Dilemma when compared to its predecessors is the fact that there isn't a protagonist, at least a traditional one for a visual novel. I mean, you technically play as one character in each team, but it's not from their view, and I ended up feeling like an observer. I feel like Sigma and Junpei in their games, but I don't really see myself as Carlos, Sean, or Diana when playing in their respective teams. This is mostly in part due to the lack of a first-person point of view. This has a lot of good to it. The cinema segments feel like parts of a movie. They look pretty good to you when you think of the hardware and how much there is. But these pros come with cons. I didn't feel emotionally invested in the characters for most of the game. There was a lot that they went through and I liked a lot of it, but besides Team D, I had a hard time feeling any connection to the characters. I think the best way to describe how this game feels to play is more like a reality TV show than an escape adventure. The first ending you'll get, no matter what, is one where you escape. And once I'd seen the outdoors, which doesn't seem like a big deal, the whole concept of escaping kinda didn't seem as big. And I think that's one of the game's biggest problems. Within a few hours of the game, you'll likely get at least one or two conclusions where someone gets to leave the base. I think what this does is it undermines the concept of escaping. What the majority of the game is finding a way for everyone to survive. And that's okay, but the game becomes less and less intense. Like when we see Mira cut into Eric's dead body and play with his heart, that's not even a big deal. Pretty much every decision is a situation in which either things stay cool or everyone dies. I think the game thrives off of shocking situations that make you grateful you're not in them. I haven't had to worry about shooting someone with a gun whose barrel is 3 out of 6 bullets, and I like it that way. But the game loves to show you crazy life or death situations. And I can't lie, it's fun, but I just find it harder and harder to take seriously. I think time travel to solve mysteries is awesome, but when Junpei and Carlos shift to a timeline where their team gets gunned down to act as a human shield for Akane so she can get some extra X-passes and hopes for them to escape into a timeline where everyone survives, all for the machine to say that X-passes from other timelines don't work, I have a hard time taking this game seriously. The memory fragments themselves are just kinda stupid. I really enjoyed being able to piece the story together and jump around space and time, but it made the whole concept of an escape effort fall apart. The game raised its own stakes way too much. The audience doesn't really give a shit if the entire base blows up. They can just use their save state. What the game then does is bring in ethical dilemmas, like killing 6 billion people to save 2 billion people from a religious fanatic who will kill all of humanity instead. The whole way for a fictional character to win the game is to do everything right until 6 people are dead and you can finesse out of there. The concept is flawed by default. The true ending can only be a happy one if the game is avoided, and that's how it's done. After all the pain, agony, and confusion the characters go through, they just decide to shift to the timeline where the game never happened and swear to themselves that they'll find the unnamed religious fanatic the villain of the game wants to get rid of. And to someone who can't time travel with the mind, the good timeline for the entire series is one where neither of the last 2 games ever even happened. At the end of the day, it's a fun game, but the creators wrote themselves into a corner. The whole game just seems to be cleaning up its own mess. And if you want to argue that, just remember the absolute disaster of a character that is Delta. Like, I love him, he's great, he's entertaining, he's so fun to watch, but he was just the product of all the loose ends that this series couldn't wrap up. The character is not just named Delta, he also goes by Brother and Q. The character's 124 years old, just enough time to beat every single big problem in Zero Escape. And he did everything, pretty much. Like, the fact that he started Free the Soul is just ridiculous. And the fact that the religious fanatic is the entire reason all this happened is so forced. And the religious fanatic is just a stupid catch-all plot point. Almost all the things that the game relies on to host the future of humanity are just built on the foundation of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. Like there's suddenly a space-time teleporter catch-all machine that exists just because aliens, and it provides the entire basis to the series. But whenever I look back at 999, it doesn't even feel like the same series. I remember 999's 20th century conspiracies that had me hooked, but the series took a strange turn and what it wanted to be became a nebulous concept that wasn't easy to visualize. So what happened? Well, looking back at discussion with Uchikoshi, it seemed like he had a lot of ideas for the final game and they didn't come to fruition. For example, he talked about stuff like Snake returning and Dio's origins being revealed. The way he described it, it sounded like a proper finale. People had a lot of doubts about whether or not this game would even be released, and it apparently had a tough development cycle. And I'm guessing a lot of those plans fell apart. I think the game just had too much to cover, and they just kind of felt pressure to just throw in a time machine and a centenarian that had like 10 aliases. And with all the color that had been lost and all the time travel mechanics, the game got lost in its own convolutedness and ended up having to get itself out of its own trap. If this sounds harsh, I think Uchikoshi is a brilliant developer, and his series is one of my favorite game series of all time. I just think that Zero Time Dilemma focused on the parts of the series people didn't care about as much. It was still excellent, and if it was its own game, I probably wouldn't even be complaining in the first place, but it leaves a lot to be desired. So what do you think? Do you think the series ended on a good note, or is it just kind of unfinished for you? Feel free to comment, I'd love to discuss.